Thank you. And we also did another volunteer for minutes taker. We come to meeting without speaker. Sir? Yeah. I said we did a minutes taker. Anyone here for that? Okay. Anybody else? Also? Thank you. Sure. Thank you. This meeting also supports the remote participant, and all the slides already uploaded on the interior of IETF meeting, so anybody could get that. This meeting, this working group is chaired by me, Xin, and Terrace. This is the meeting agenda. We have the 7 presentations today. And first, the SAP Autonomic Country Plan. That's the working group document update. So, and the second is GRASP API, also the working group document. And then the chairs will do a little bit for the new chapter on scrapping. And then that's the information distribution in autonomic networking, and ASA environment and the Anima ecosystem as well. Then we have user use of EPSI, VSM closed group. But now, since working in the room, I don't have your slides yet. Oh, sorry, you give that. Okay, thank you. Yeah, no problem. Then we have the layer 2 autonomic control players. Any issue for the agenda today? Once, twice, go. Okay. And that's the agenda for tomorrow. I will review that tomorrow. And very short brief for the working group milestones. We have 2 articles published, but 3 in the rack for the waiting for SAP. And the SAP draft already submitted for ISD almost 2 years. And we still have 1 single discuss for that. Hopefully. Okay. And also Brasky is already on the 30th version and still have 2 discuss. Hopefully we could, finish that before next meeting. So, because particularly for Brasky, we actually have to finish that before we can really process the lots following up work. Then we have the GRASP API adopted 2 years ago, and that one is, I believe, reached the maturity in the working group stage. And we have the constraint virtual adopted last year, and it's already 5th version, and I believe that's in a good shape as well. Okay, so let's move to the first presentation.
switch.
IT support stuff. No, the case is this computer cannot download what we already uploaded. Lots of probe will be uploaded. Okay.
All right. Welcome to the never-ending ACP document. Okay. You still have to support a little bit. Just scroll down. It doesn't seem to be working. So in IETF 105, basically we updated the ACP document to version 20. And at that point in time, there was the review from the security directorate outstanding. And the gen art was also not closed, so that was an oversight by Alicia, so that was closed. And then I tried to work with the remaining discussers from Ben Kaduk, and he'd also taken over the review of Eric Rexpoller, the other security AD, but I hadn't received any response after IETF from him, so there was some delay on his side. I had in 20 in the feedback set there were two discussion points left open from my side that I had to do. I tried to answer them in 21, which I posted before the deadline for IETF 106. So the first one is one that we discussed also in IETF 105, and that was the use of RSA-22 address as the object to encode ACP information in the ACP certificate. And basically after the discussion in 105, the conclusion from the working group seemed to have been that we want to stick with this because it had shown all the benefits. Now I'll get back to that point at a little bit later. And then I try to close all the open encryption detail gaps, and that's basically what's in /21. I wanted to quickly go through those. So basically in the ACP certificates, there were a lot of updates, me reading through a lot of documents trying to ensure that we have the right requirements about RSA and ECDH support in the certificates, and ultimately the high-level gist of the requirements is as little as possible, but also that we can leverage the new technology. So we must do RSA because it's still more widely used, and the latest standards security track RFCs referred to also are asking for RSA as a must. ECDH would be better because it achieves, with shorter key lengths, the same security, but we would reasonably only be able to do it in networks where the certificates are only used within the ACP, so that you know that all the devices would be able to support it. So it's not widely enough spread if we want to reuse these certificates for other authentication, like applications running within the ACP. So, and that's basically what the text says in so many words, and all these magical details like the elliptic curve sizes. And all that stuff was hopefully correctly stolen from other RFCs that I read up onto, and the feedback from Ben in verbally when I met him here seemed that this is fine. 6.7 security associations simply added that we must have perfect forward security, and also added a note about the fact that we may forego actual encryption in the secure channel protocol if a secure channel is defined to leverage underlying layer 2 security association, like for example MACsec, and then the secure channel itself might only be required for the authentication and the derivation of the underlying layer 2 encryption function. So, and that of course would avoid us to duplicate encryption efforts that we're already doing at layer 2. And so now I have a 2-person IT team.
That's fine. You have tried.
Okay. So, so then also TLS for grasp. So that was not specified in before, and Ben, being the expert on TLS, suggested some specific profiles, of which I selected also the minimum, hopefully equally sufficient subset in support of also AES and then or RSA and ECDHA. GCM, the Voila counter mode, also is known to be better. So basically, because we don't have backward compatibility needs for grasp, this would all be new. It's hopefully sufficient to have very small things, other details also stolen from other typical security documents. So that kind of, to me, sounded good, but then when I looked at the process, I kind of woke up to learning something new that I didn't like. So the ISG reviewers we had since -13 are listed here, right? So originally the document was owned by Terry Manderson, and then we had all these reviews from the ISG members listed there. And the problem is that the process I didn't understand, and that seemingly also nobody else was actively working on, is that when an ISG member leaves the ISG, his vote for the count turns into pumpkin. So it's not counted anymore. So the total number of reviews we need is not reached anymore. And besides, we would have also needed a new owner beside Terry Manderson for kind of casting the yes vote and taking the process to the next step, like, approving it in the end. So all that kind of turned up when I raised the question with the ISG. And the reason why we don't have an owner, by the way, is that the logical owner would be the AD of the group, Ignas, but he had to recuse himself from that document. And so the new owner to be selected would also have to define the process. So what's the current status? So the security review needs to be closed. Benjamin said that he pretty much likes all the things except for IPsec parameters seem to be missing 1 or 2 pieces. He's not an expert on that, but he's given me the specific name of a person I should work with for whatever IPsec parameters may be missing. I hope not much. And then he wanted to actually discuss with the working group the RFC 822 address, and I told him that I think this would be so important that we'll make a slot for him, but he doesn't have time right now, but he'll have time tomorrow. So that's basically the slot that we need to discuss the ACP domain information element with him. So the proposed new AD owner of the document is going to be Eric Winke. I was talking yesterday with him. He can only finish his review in January, but we'll meet in December to prepare for that. And he would then resubmit it to the ISG. Hopefully he could already start getting 2 additional reviewers beyond him that we need right now. And I'll also push out another revision right now this week just to summarize the changes since we entered the ISG in -13, because there is a lot of textual change, but it's 95% of that is a lot more explanation, but very few small limited technical changes, I think, for the stuff, and those were refinements, so really no major technical change. But if you do a diff, obviously there's a lot of textual change. So, and then of course I started to bitch about the process, right? So talk with Alicia and raise the case in Data Tracker that, somebody gets alerted, because seemingly, people like me not aware of the process, and ISG also not following up on basically already in time reassigning additional reviewers. All right.
Any questions? Thank you.
Yeah. Looking forward to complete this. It's already taken. So by next January, that will be 2 years.
Yeah, we'll have a big celebration.
I will invite everybody for that celebration. Okay.
It's crazy.
And we could have 4 RFCs at the same time from our working group. Thank you. Okay, so next will be Brian.
Yep. Okay.
Hopefully.
Well, it's an indication for the chair to
Okay. Well, I can see my first slide. Can everybody else see the first slide? Yes. So I think we're okay. This should be fairly short. Thank you. So just a quick reminder for people who haven't reread that draft recently. It talks about a model in which there is a functional library called by autonomic service agents that communicates by some interprocess communication magic with the core functions of the GRASP implementation. And underneath those core functions, there's going to be one or multiple daemons, depending on the implementation model. And those daemons do things like listening for unexpected unicast communications and listening for multicasts and so on. And there are going to be some various caches. So that's the model in which we're working. The function library is what the user would see. Just adjust a little bit. Perfect. Yeah. So the recent changes to the document are that we have improved the discussion of layering to make it more correspond to what was on the picture than it did before. Mentioned the necessity for a daemon or multiple daemons, which is an implementation detail. Improved the description of asynchronous operations, in particular adding some discussion of callbacks, which were not mentioned before. One of the reasons for that is my skill set doesn't include event loop programming or callbacks. It includes, my skill set includes threading, which I personally, as a computer scientist, find much more satisfying than event loops and callbacks. But hopefully now the document covers both ways of implementing the asynchronous operations. We were asked for more explanation of the two nonces that appear in the API. When that explanation is in the text, basically the ASA nonce is a way of saying, yes, I am the same autonomic service agent that called you 10 minutes ago. And the session nonce is a way of tracking a session when there are multiple sessions going on in parallel, which is fairly standard, in fact, in an event loop environment. At Michael's request, we added an age limit parameter to the discover primitive, because in fact he's absolutely right. It's useful to be able to say, I don't want to hear about a result that was discovered 10 minutes ago. I want a fresh one. And we clarified a bit of the text about the dry run feature of GRASP, not the feature itself, but how the feature is represented in the API. I can do it later. So next steps. This is an informational document. It says it's a conceptual outline of an API for GRASP. It's not meant to be a tight spec. You can't code directly from it, at least I can't. And it's not at all clear to me that at this stage in the life of our software that it would even be a good idea to define anything like a definitive spec for an API, which in any case isn't something the IETF is very good at. So our belief is that as an informational document, this is pretty much as good as it gets, and it's ready for a working group last call. Next one. Or maybe there isn't a next one.
No.
Ah, that's the last one.
Yeah.
So that's really all I wanted to say, and it's the chair's decision whether we start that discussion now or on the list or what.
Can I see a show of hands who has read the document? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So who thinks this is ready for last call? 2, 3, 4. Okay, 4 people. Okay. So
I believe and
I have another one. Michael put his hand up.
yeah.
okay. Yeah, I noticed there was a
Get closer to the
reviewer
microphone.
from. I noticed there was a reviewer from Guangdong, but most of his comments addressed.
I believe so. Yeah. I mean, we got good comments from Michael and from Guangpeng, and I think we addressed both of them. That was the intention.
Okay. Yeah.
So if the people who thought they read it and didn't put their hands up for ready for last call, I would like to hear the reasons by email. It's better.
Okay. Yeah, we should ask this question. Does anybody here show hands think this document is not ready for working group last call? Okay, none. So we'll confirm that in the mailing list, and there will be 2 weeks period for the working group last call. We'll do that next week or the week after. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Still you?
Again, me.
You.
Or is it?
No, that's the chair.
Yeah, but yes.
We should find the.
It's fine. So, given how this is working group stuff, I'm allowed to sit. Yes.
Okay. Close the microphone. So.
Okay, so couple years back we started the new charter process as well, and that actually finished in September 6th when the second charter was approved. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what that means for us. So first, just a quick rundown over the charter. It's actually 3 slides, so I think I don't want to necessarily read the first 2 slides because they're mostly the explanation for people who are kind of not engaged in the working group. So let me skip to basically the 3rd slide, which is pretty much defining the scope of the second charter, and I think we should read through that one as a reminder for us. So the scope of possible work items are as follows. Additional work are subject to extra approval from the responsible AD. So first, extensions to the ANI, including all variations of ANI deployment, such in virtualized environments, information distribution within an autonomic network, ANI, OAMP, operations administration management provisioning, interaction with Yang-based mechanism, defining the domain boundary and membership management of the domain. Second one, support for autonomic service agents. So that's basically beyond the ANI. So that's why we can adopt these now, including design and implementation guidelines for ASA, lifecycle management, authorization, coordination of ASI. Oops, and I think there is missing here in the slide a new section. Brewski features, including proxies, enrollment, adaptations over various network protocols, variation of voucher formats. Generic use of autonomic network and new grasp extensions, options for them, including bulk transfer, DNS-SD interworking, autonomic resource management, autonomic SLA assurance, autonomic multi-tenant management, autonomic network measurement. And finally, integration with network operation centers, including autonomic discovery connectivity to NOC, Yang-based ANI or ASA management, and reporting autonomic functions from nodes to NOCs. So that's basically a really good set of areas where we can explore work. So let's try to see where we stand with the work. So as a reminder of where we stand with at least working group adopted work right now, we've got 2 RFCs. We've got these 3 documents that are waiting for the next 2 documents, the ACP and Brewski. And we have 2 of these working group documents right now. We just heard the GRASP API, and there's also the constraint voucher document that we already adopted because they already fit into Charter Round 1. So we also have milestones, and I think there, Ignace, there was something miserably bad happening in transferring. Before 105, I put milestones in, and when I was looking them up right now, a lot of them look like there is a mixture between dates that were meant for a call for adoption and the actual submission to the ISG, which was always meant to be about a year after adoption for the working group. So somehow it would be good if we can sit down and try to fix these ones because the red ones are kind of seemingly not correct.
Ignace Bogdanas. So this appears just to be a technical thing. You decide what dates you realistically expect those to have, and that can be fixed.
But I thought to remember that we always had the milestones for adoption, and they're completely missing. If we want to give up on adoption and just saying, because, you know, if we don't adopt, then the submission to ISG is kind of...
Milestones are at the discretion of the working group.
Okay.
So this is for you to decide what do you want to achieve.
Right. I did put all the milestones for adoption, and then kind of about a year later for each of them, from my understanding, talking to the authors, for submission to ISG. So there is a lot of missing and the dates of these. So in any case, right, I just wanted to let the working group know that these milestones are, I think, not correct right now. So we'll kind of need to fix them. Okay. So now, what are the target drafts for working group adoption? So the ones that we did mention in the discussion for the charter are exactly the information distribution over GRASP that's going to be presented here, the guidelines for developing autonomic service agents, and the constraint joint proxies. So basically, we're going to, ask for their adoption as well. For the joint proxy, I haven't seen Peter yet, and I sent an email out to him figuring out, because there was not even a presentation scheduled. But
He's not here. Okay, let's expand.
He is registered to be here in person, but he hasn't arrived. That's what I read from the attendance list. So we'll see. But otherwise, we'll just take it to the list. That's fine, of course. So that would result with the 2 ones that we're having right now in a first round of follow-up documents in 5 drafts for the working group. But of course, there is more. So here's basically the documents that are currently not expired and associated with the Anima working groups. So for the ones being presented here, obviously, express your opinion about how much you think they're already in state. Ask for adoption if you think that's appropriate right now. And as the working group member, please, consider when, we have a list of more documents to be adopted, which ones you think would be highest priority, so that we also make sure that we work on the things and you provide the feedback that is most important for you. There are more expired documents. So for the authors of those, please refresh them. And then if you want to have them taken up now with the new charter, if you have any, I think that all the documents that we had reasonably discussed in the past and that expired because they were out of charter, I think 90% of them would be within the charter. I think there are several from the same author, so the authors should pick what they would like to work on first. But I think certainly what we didn't do in the charter was put together a priority list of what we would like to work in Brewski, and I think that would be a good discussion to have tomorrow when we're talking more about the different Brewski drafts and where they are.
But actually, before we going too much for the Brewski discuss, I would ask the question toward Michael. How long do you think the Brewski document will take to be ready for publish? I mean, out of the ISG for RFC.
That's the whole point of my presentation.
Yeah.
I'm hoping it'll be this week.
with the last two discuss? Okay, yeah, if that's the case, I don't have any problem. But you know, given the history, we have the non-process with the Brisky and the ACP. I'm not really confident on that by myself.
I mean, I think maybe to rephrase your question, is there even a risk in adopting Brusky enhancements as long as Brusky isn't done, right? I think we can make a vet whether any change that could still happen through the ISG review of Brusky would have an impact on these other documents, but I would think in most cases of my understanding about these follow-on documents, that wouldn't even be the case.
Yeah, that's what
I sincerely believe that there will be no significant technical bits on the wire changes. That the only possible risk is that there may be some significant technical operational comment about doctor, it hurts when I lift my arm, please don't lift your arm, right? So that's the only thing. Someone will come up with this doesn't work, we don't like this, blah, 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 and it says, well, just don't do that, right? We'll cross some text out or something. I don't know. That's the only thing I can see at this point. And I think that after August and September's endless threads, that we're done with that. Okay? Yeah. So I think there's no risk of adopting new things that way.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Then I guess we can move to the next. That's the last slide, right?
Yeah, that's the last slide.
Okay. That will be distributed information distribution. So that's author.
Hi, so my name is Arthur Hecker. I'm presenting for all the authors. So we had this document around for quite a while, and this document essentially describes a way how GRASP can be extended such that we can do information distribution, or let's say at least some kind of publish-subscribe service within ANI. So what we actually did, we defined two specific modules inside there. So in the other, you would have essentially an information distribution submodule, let's say, which has three submodules additionally. And all that is then broken down to GRASP, either through usage of synchronization messages in GRASP or through extensions of GRASP. So this is what is described in the draft. Now, specifically in the latest versions, the version 12 that we uploaded recently, we have extended some classes in the queue management submodule, which is probably not very important to discuss right now. What's more important, I guess, is the question of the relevance to the rechartering. So what Turles presented before, you have seen information distribution as one of the key points in the rechartered Anima. And this document actually addresses this information distribution in a specific way. So while we can discuss the quality of the document, certainly rewrite it, improve the language, and all the things, as editorial things can be done a lot to this document. It's by far not finished. I would say that we need this document to become a working group document. And this is the major point, essentially. So we can refine many technical things. We can even see, you know, whether we are using GRASP as we should, whether there are alternatives to this. But we have a requirement session which identifies why we needed it all, how it can be done. So all the things somehow, I think, are relevant to the information distribution question in general. And therefore, we would like to actually ask the group and the audience whether this document could be adopted as a working group document, as opposed to the personal contribution as now.
Any more questions?
Laurent Chavaya, I haven't read the draft recently, but in what you mentioned as the updates, is it that you consider all information type to be relevant to events only, or?
No, the point is that we have some kind of understanding of rather either instantaneous transfer, let's say you already know to whom you want to send the information, okay? Then essentially the node can directly say, these are my recipient nodes, and then essentially it can go. This can be implemented with Grasp without many changes today, okay, using synchronization messages. Then again, you can have a completely different model where you can say, okay, I have some information that is somehow of relevance to all nodes, but I don't know which nodes, because I don't know which AFs will be essentially interested in that. And maybe even nodes joining later could be interested in this information, still did not expire. And then we have some kind of a publish-subscribe model. And for this different types of events, we have different queues. And the events actually more count for the second type because we need some kind of notification, right?
Yeah. And just clarification again, the question again. Is it necessarily binding to Grasp, or we can have other communication mechanism?
So
there is information.
That's a good question. Yeah,
versus,
I understood. So the point is, I think the answer is probably no. Okay. This document does the following. We first discuss what needs to be done and why we actually need information distribution as, supported service from the other, and not just some kind of random thing, because right now it's undefined and we clearly have it as a need, just for intent distribution, for example. We're always discussing this, but now it's in the charter. So we then went on to define also a specific implementation, but this is probably a specific implementation, which I guess we can discuss later. But we need some kind of document like that to start this discussion and to have people contributing.
I agree. I think at some point we will have to make a decision in the working group about whether we stick the two aspects together, what needs to be distributed and how, versus the specific implementation or link to Grasp.
So Grasp has, of course, the advantage.
Independence to see, but we may decide that it's better to take both together.
Exactly. So in principle, yes, but Grasp has, of course, obvious advantage of already being there and somehow being naturally suitable for some things. And we do not, it's kind of signaling protocol, very generic. And we do not mean to use it for bulk transfer of data, but we certainly mean to use it, so to say, as notification that, there is a new information element available, right? Or, download it there. Something like that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Brian Carpenter. My comment on that last point is that what I've discovered of the various toys I've been building with Grasp is that the discovery mechanism is actually pretty good. When you want to actually do something which isn't, in Grasp terms, a negotiation or a synchronization, it gets a bit clumsy, which is why I recently added a trick to my implementation where you could hand the session over with just send receive calls as if it was normal TCP or TLS. And I think that is the way we could play this, to say protocols that don't need Grasp don't use Grasp, but they can use the discovery features.
Ignas Bagdonas. The question that I have is both with the hats of the working group participant and as an ISG member. Now, it is particularly about API and extensions of the API. Given that the base API document is informational, and it talks about topics which are much closer to the implementation details than the protocol specification details. That certainly will raise questions within ISG of why we are trying to document something like that. There is, for several years, there have been discussions coming from ISG side on documents which specify use cases, applicabilities, and things like that. And while there is no strict single answer to that, in general, such documents, they are not seen too positively. I'm not saying what you're doing is plain wrong. The question that I'm raising is, what is the value of specifying implementation details of the API? IETF certainly is not a place to standardize implementations. And for that, the vendor that wants to do that, they don't need IETF. They need a market for that. And the market will decide whether that API is applicable or not. Trying to specify the protocol mechanics and the functionality of that certainly is within the scope. Now, the way how I see this API document and extensions to that, they are going far deeper into the implementation domain. Again, I'm not saying that this is wrong, but I'm just saying that this will raise questions. So what benefits you see going this path? is this really needed? Why it is not enough just to standardize the basically protocol mechanics and the recommendation guidelines? Why do you really need to specify detailed
Can I ask you a
APIs?
question? Are you talking about the API guidelines or are you talking about the information distribution?
Within this context, I'm talking about the both.
Aha. I can obviously not answer both, but I can only answer for that part. For that part, I'm not sure about the informational bit that we need to see. But what we actually specify is part of the functionality of the ANI, which we believe is required for information distribution. So we have GRASP there, which is required to set up the ANI, and it's working already, right? And if we want to have some kind of pub subservice or this information distribution in general, then we need some additional bits and flags within GRASP, which are absolutely not API relevant, but which are relevant to the protocol on the wire. That is what is being specified. Then again, in this document, we do first the analysis of requirements. We say, yes, that's why we need it. And then we specify a solution. As we just said, we could discuss probably the, details of the solution, but certainly it's about the protocol on the wire, because we need to enable an additional functionality, completely, I would say, orthogonal to what is so far in there. It's not only about opening communication channels or secure communication channels, right? But it's about storing some data within the autonomous network infrastructure for some short while or for longer while and so on. It's about the pub-sub integration inside of it. So it's not only about APIs.
That part, so I think we both understand that. But if we read the document without this prior understanding, this question naturally arises. And if you look from the perspective of ISG review, those who are not following what is happening here certainly will raise that question. So maybe this needs to be explained rather detailedly in the scope of the document, what it is trying to define and what it doesn't try to define.
Okay, understood. In any case, the document for me, from my perspective, the co-author is not yet ready for any kind of last calls. So we absolutely need to revise it several times, several rounds, because this is obviously, probably this is true. If this is the impression that the reader is getting, then we need to get rid of this, indeed, yeah.
Yeah. Shane, Huawei, with my working group's chair hat on, actually I have opinion on both documents. The standalone API document is informational document which provides some, extra information to how may implement the GRASP and how that may help the upper layer ASA to use it. So that's useful. But for this document, I'm with you. I think this document shouldn't depend on the GRASP API document or the API. Yes. I just look through the document. There's a lot part mentioned, the GRASP API and the how to integrate with GRASP API, which I think we shouldn't do that.
Okay,
because
understood.
You are doing a standard track document and reference a lot to our informational document, which is not right. So I would say that part of information is still useful, but move that from the main document maybe into the appendix. Totally remove. Yeah. Sorry,
I would use the microphone. So how precisely that is done is for working group to decide. But what should happen is that it very clearly states the scope of what it tries to define and what it doesn't try to define.
Clear. Comment taken. Yeah, understood.
So to answer Igna's question about the API, starting first, I think one of these principles that I always, expected Anima and ANI to help with, but which I think we haven't really well spoken out, is the ability to actually decompose the so far very often monolithic software in a network device to be composed of interoperating components from different vendors. So one way, for example, to think about the API document in a term that I think would make it a lot more amenable to, this resistance force against APIs is if, the API was specified in something like a REST specification as opposed to the more informal approach that we have chosen in the document. And then I think it would become very clear that just because the two components, the provider and the consumer of the API, are sitting on the same system, it's still an interoperability issue that we want to solve, right? So that's my answer. The second is for your document. I think that I've only superficially read it, so I'll need to spend more cycles on that. But it seems to me that it also only gives very coarse guidelines. There are some extensions, right? So that's basically real specification part, but there is not even a single, let's say, example interoperable solution you could build out of that, right?
Not yet.
Right. Notwithstanding the fact that obviously the idea of this document is to allow multiple different independent information distribution solutions to be built. It might be helpful to have, let's say, the minimum single reference one included in the document to basically, make it clear that we're really talking about integration at two levels, generic things to be applied to multiple solutions, and then one example. Maybe that's a solution.
Yes, so to the second comment, I guess we wanted to do something like that. That's why we adopted GRASP, because by essentially saying GRASP can do this and extending GRASP, we are going for something quite standard as at least as some kind of minimum, denominator, which is common then to an ANI. Then there could be other, like maybe out-of-band ways for information distribution as well, where GRASP could be just setting up the channels, okay? So this is also possible. But indeed, I understand and I fully agree that this document is not ready for publication. We need more contributions to this. That's exactly the point. So far, it's somehow, a personal draft, which is more or less evolving with the authors. We never received any kind of review or comments from the community, okay? So please do not be surprised. Obviously, we do not know how the community understands what we are trying to write. And yes, the language has to be improved. That's for sure.
So maybe one suggestion for the API document, and then we can take it offline. This is just brainstorming, right? I mean, we have some successful work about APIs and tabs, right? And they also don't have, a concrete API, but they're all abstract APIs. And I think that was also the goal of what Brian's document is trying to achieve, so as not to, forego different instantiations like REST being a possible one, but shouldn't be constrained to that. So I was only giving REST as an example, but maybe we can, seek the help of tabs to basically ask them what minimum formalism they, think is necessary to basically achieve that level of standard that we currently have there. Is that, would that kind of, as I said, we can take it offline, but if there's expertise, maybe we can use it. Right. So just the standard one. Who has read this document? 1, 2, 3. Doesn't count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Who thinks it's ready for adoption? Okay. Thank you. We'll take it to the list.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So what's next? You see, Brent? I hope this one. We'll see.
Okay. This is supposed to be tied to a particular draft, but I won't really be talking about it very much. And it will come back to the question that Ignas raised a little while ago, but explicitly. Recent changes to the document, none. We've had quite a small amount of feedback except at the very beginning. And that, in my opinion, is why we need to discuss the more abstract question of an Anima ecosystem. So why do we need one? We, in a very general sense. A deployable autonomic network needs more than an ACP and grasp. It needs to achieve management goals that the Network Operations Center cannot achieve manually. Otherwise, why are we here? In my opinion, that requires a library of autonomic service agents, and if we're using the GRASP model, a library of GRASP objective definitions, and it requires tools to deploy and oversee the ASAs. We have some documents which sort of address some of these questions, including the one I'm theoretically talking about. I won't read out the list. But we got no clear working group goals in that area, in my opinion. And then we have the question of what ecosystem issues can the IETF tackle? Missing standards, operational guidance, implementation guidance, and what issues are out of scope for the IETF and who should be encouraged to deal with them. So I think this is a generalization of Ignace's point that if we just stop, at the on-the-wire protocol, we in the sense of the industry, then nothing will happen. So someone has to make this ecosystem stuff happen. But there's a limit to what we can do in the IETF, and that means in practice there's a limit to what the ISG will let through the ballot. Right. There's other IETF work we might want to consider. NetConf and Yang in an autonomic network, NetConf over ACP, NetConf over GRASP. I just added this line this week, use of MUDs for authorization in an autonomic network. So the concrete examples of things that probably need to play nicely with an autonomic network, which are going on, two efforts that are going on in the ops area working group. That's all I want to say. I want a little bit guidance from the working group as to where we should take any of this topic. And both the chairs want to go to the microphone. I don't know. Michael.
Michael Richardson. So I had a question. I guess we were walking along a couple days ago and someone wanted to know about the Anima stuff. What's that all about, right? And, I realized I didn't have a really good elevator pitch at the moment. But the question that they asked was, is this going to permit permissionless IPv6 network extensions in the same way that we typically and uglily, plug NAT44s into V4 networks and just extend them without permission, right? Because it's going to let us do this with V6. And I looked and said, gosh, that would be really good result, wouldn't it? Right?
Isn't that what HomeNet were trying to do?
Yes, exactly. So the part of and whether we succeeded or not is a good question. But maybe the permissionlessness of that NAT44 scenario, that it was completely permissionless and also unmanageable, was a bad thing, okay, but maybe we need to find some intermediate point. And so I go back and I was sitting there looking at your list of slides. And so what happened with our address assignment ASA spec?
It's in misref hell.
That's where it is. Okay, it's in misref. Okay, right. Okay, so
for a long time it was in limbo, but now it's gone to hell.
Right. So my take on the stuff, and it's sort of not so terrible that rechartering took so long, and I guess in the end, I actually think we need to take a breath. We need to let our queue empty. Also let our mind our collective minds kind of empty with some of the issues. And we also need to let some of the running code catch up to the whole scenario. And so I would ask our area directors and IESG to please not take our lack of activity as a sign that we have no work to do, but rather that we're too busy working to bother talking about it for a while. Fair enough? That's my opinion.
Okay. But you agree the topic matters?
Yes, I think the topic matters. I also want to point that I think that many of the participants in this working group have gone through forcible job changes or employer changes, with the result that there's at least a couple major vendors that are essentially not in this room anymore. Okay, so that's a pretty significant thing, and the argument for why do we need standardization if we only don't have as many large vendors in the room is maybe a good one, but I don't think it's. I mean, I think it's still important.
So, as soon as ACP is
and your name, sir?
Torlis. Yeah, so I'm not doing anything right now until basically the ACP document is out of the IESG queue. But then the answer would be that I'm still coming from what I know to be working from pre-standard implementations and what I think is fundamental, and that's pretty much the DNS SD for service discovery of important, services in existing networks. So really the pragmatic stuff. I think that allows, people with existing networks to see the biggest value, as opposed to the things that I find cool, like all these, how do I structure ASA and these things, which are more researchy, which I love, but I don't think that they necessarily give us the, shortest term best traction, with the industry, which unfortunately is very backward facing.
Well,
so that's just my personal opinion.
That's one of the reasons why I did experiment with interfacing GRASP to DNSSD, as you know, and it's not even hard to do.
No, but I think you raised a much longer set of things, and all I was saying is my preference is to, work on the things that hopefully give us more immediate attraction to, not the most forward-looking networks, but the ones that want to solve the incremental things.
Do note what the last document on my slide was.
David Dye from CICT. Because you have mentioned that Anima is an ecosystem, so I've got two questions. One question is, because Anima is an ecosystem, then I think the implementation and application scenarios are very important. Then can you give some examples for the application scenarios and implementations? Another question is, because Anima is an ecosystem, and what's the relationship between the animal and the AI and machine learning? That's my question. That's my two questions.
Well, an example scenario was already mentioned, which was the address assignment mechanism, where the RFC is stuck waiting to be published. But we did that right at the beginning because it was one of the use cases that emerged in the original BOF that led to the formation of the working group. And the idea there would be that there would be no more need for manual address assignment within an enterprise network, because the Anima stuff would just go away and do it. So you could find that draft, which is sitting in the RFC editor's queue, and you could find some code which I wrote to implement it a couple of years ago. And we just, it's all part of the queue that we've been talking about for getting our work finished. In terms of, you said AI and machine learning, as far as I'm concerned, that's still a research topic which the NMRG is looking at. I don't know how we'd integrate it. I feel that we should do, right? But I don't know yet how we would do it. I agree with you that it should be there. The idea there would clearly be that you would have an autonomic service agent that would be connected to the AI system and could talk to other autonomic service agents that were not connected to the AI system. So you have to have almost certainly a central resource for the AI which is used by distributed systems. And we could easily do that if we only knew what we would be doing with the AI.
Thank you.
I would like to comment on that. When we did our recharter, we actually leave the AI out of scope intentionally. And actually, as Brian also explained, it is possible, we have the machine learning or AI mechanism we sit in the some certain autonomic service agent, but that's nothing to do with the protocol or the signaling we are standardized here. So basically, that just means some logic fulfilled by the machine learning or AI use the Anima infrastructure. If that's the case, we support it. But we're not going to, really discuss how the algorithm, AI algorithm or machine learning algorithm to be applied, through the signaling or the autonomic network distributed. Right? Okay.
Brian, can you go back 1 or 2 slides up, please? No, slide 3, please. Yeah. At the point when you say requires a library of ASIs, I will say I agree with that. I think where Anima is right now, we have developed some protocols, a framework, different things that are useful. Now we need to have a bit more like the guy before about examples, use cases, application areas. So I think this is important to understand what could be then the standardization requirement or the standardization needs to address different areas. So maybe we need some kind of use case documents or a phase where we try to see what are the application of what could be the types of ASA. I'll just finish on that. It's also because, but on that thing that we need to have use cases, for me, this is where we reach a bit the limit of what IETF is used to do with respect to your question on an ecosystem, because then ASA for the security space or ASA in IoT or ASA, you see, and then this is not anymore Anima or even anymore, it's a bit like cross area or even application space that can be completely outside IETF. So for me, we need to investigate that. This could be channeled in the working group through a set of documents or discussion points. But I'm not sure the IETF, to develop an ecosystem, I'm not sure the IETF is the right place for that. I'm not saying it's not feasible, but I don't have good examples in mind. I think we talked some years ago or some couple of IETF ago about having also more implementation with maybe participation to the IETF hackathon or open source projects, which can be also a way to make an ecosystem live. And final comment, I think for this ASA discussion, I'm not sure we have yet a good description or a good understanding of what ASA is or could be, because it's essentially functionally oriented. And to bring back to the question of the use of AI or machine learning inside these ASAs, it's a valid question. But then it opens a whole bunch of discussion about this kind of how to describe an ASA in terms of capabilities, to analyze things, to take decisions. So this aspect of cognition, intelligence, which is really not the place for IETF. Maybe more IETF, but so this is a bit it's a bit blurred.
That's aspect. Exactly why I have this question about what can we do.
I probably for this note should be sitting up front, but I think just a general note to all the co-authors of the current drafts or drafts to be looking into this problem, right? there are a lot of other working groups where there could be, help and interest in what we specifically are doing. So when I started the DNS stuff, I of course also went to the DNS working group. As I said, maybe, for API things, something like tabs could be helpful, right? I think there is nothing stopping us from proposing to talk about the subjects that we're interested in what we think is the best working group to, create more feedback, or also, in these other examples that we're showing that may have the use cases and create, more advancement through that. So that's definitely also some additional work for authors, not simply thinking that we can operate in a silo, but, create contacts elsewhere in the IETF.
A remark more, it's about what ASAs are or could be. I usually take the comparison with virtual network function or network function. I could see a parallel between an ASA and a network function. But typically, network function, this is not really IETF, which is developing network functions. There are many other places where people are building or proposing those functions, and also the standardization needs on these network functions. Needs to be clearly understood and defined. And this is part of, one point I will have in my presentation on what could be some standardization needs for that.
No, I think that's a very interesting comparison, because the reason why things like VNFs are so managed to the largest extent to be, something the IETF can ignore is because it didn't really change, the APIs and the protocols used, but it just changed the shape of the individual nodes, right, from hardware to software. Whereas what we're trying to do is to decompose, the monolithic system and create, between the ASA into operating interfaces and being able to compose that, right? So that in the end, something, for example, what you've been doing in terms of defining dependencies, right? And these complex management operation that we can't solve right now, that they can be done easier, for example, right? So from that perspective, I think is the explanation why what we're doing might have a lot more need and opportunity to be done in the IETF as an, new interoperating standards things than what traditional VNFs have done so far.
Tignos Bagdonas. Main thing is I'm really happy that this type of a discussion is happening, and this is clearly needed. Now, let me expand a little bit on that with a few, say, rules or assumptions. First, this is IETF working group, not IRTF working group, and therefore the deliverables should be, say, tangible engineering components. Now, IETF is good at working on components, and that is what the individual working groups produce. IETF is not that good at working on combining those components together and then building something like a system. That's one. Second thing, my impression from especially reading the slide that is in front is that it is, at this point of time, it's a question more about the requirements and understanding the problem space and where that problem lies. And only then trying to address the components which can be addressed here or in some other working group. Right now, it sounds like we are trying to find we're trying to use the solutions that we already have, the fragments, and then try to find out a problem for that. This doesn't seem to be practical. In my view, there needs to be an outreach into the user community to understand what the problems are. The way how ACP started, it started with a very narrow but a very specific problem, right? And therefore, it resulted in a tangible and deployable solution. If we are trying to look into broader scope overall into say all these autonomic nodes without having a detailed understanding of a problem space, I think this belongs, or not belongs, but turns much more into IRTF type of work than IETF type of work. So this is something that, in my view, is the first step to understand what is the problem space. Then slice that problem space into the components, which can be worked either here in Anima or maybe somewhere else. So it appears that some dispatch style mechanism, well, some areas have dispatch style groups which bring in the new incoming work and all sorts of other things, and they try to distribute and find a home for that. Maybe something like that is needed. There were similar discussions and here at this meeting too about the IoT. Well, IoT systems or work more on a more broader scope than just in individual protocols and components in IoT domain. I think this has a lot of binding together, and maybe that could be one place where both the Anima and IoT related topics are being discussed and kind of sliced for the further work. But the starting point, at least in my view, appears that we need to reach out to the potential user base of these deliverables, potential deliverables, to understand whether what we are trying to do is a problem for them and whether we understand what is a problem for them. Now, this is definitely not IETF community. We have severe problems of operator participation in IETF, and that will not get better anytime soon. Therefore, this is an outreach question. The question to what organization or what venue do we need to outreach? And again, I think this is one of the topics that needs to be addressed first before trying to do something on a protocol work. Yes, we are engineers and dealing with protocols. It's fun and easy, but the fundamental question is, what do we need to do from a problem perspective?
Okay.
We're now reaching the point of catching up with the end of the slot time for this. Last comment, please.
So if I may, the answer is they need a tangible demo. Okay? And may say that it's nothing to do with the IETF, but the point is that that's the next step for the work, and we can't come back to the rest of the stuff until we get those guys excited, and that requires work that is of a different kind, right? So that's all. So that's why I'm saying, please don't shut us down if we doesn't look like we're actually doing something at the IETF, because it's just not happening here. It can't happen here for a little while until we have, as you say, the operators come in and get excited.
Right. So now I'm joking. I will not shut down the working group while it is meeting, because there was already a precedent, and that would be a clone.
But I'm saying we might not need to meet, but that doesn't mean we're inactive, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, we might not need FaceTime as much for a little while, but we have a lot of documents that are still processing, and we probably might need FaceTime for that. But we might not be adding new documents because it's just not ready yet, right?
You are the working group. You have rechatted. You have your milestones. Now it is for you to work on those milestones. Well, if you are looking at an AD who will guide you through all of that, I think I can help, but this is for you to do that. Once we are 6 years overdue the milestones dates, then probably the question of shutting this might be raised, but there are no such intentions at this point of time.
So this was a great philosophical discussion. We need to come to the close of this. I wanted to remind that the starting point of all of this was the draft that is talking about the guidelines for ASAs. And I think as much as we understand that this is at the fringes of, the actual ability to create interoperating running code, but really at the starting point of that, we want to make a call for adoption after this meeting. So just for the people in the room who has read the document. 1, 2, 1.
ASA
Yeah.
guidelines.
6, 7. The ASA guidelines. Okay. Who think it's ready for adoption? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, of course. Like all the time, right? Whatever we do in the room, the list will take over.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to present work that is being done in another group in ETSI. So I'm not representing this group. I'm participating in this ETSI group, but it's really an individual view. So don't take this as an official communication. But I think it's related to the discussion initiated by Brian on this ASA ecosystem, and I mean how to approach this, and maybe the fact that other groups are doing something could help us in this process. So just very quickly, I have a lot of slides, but I will not present all of them. This is in the slides for your reference if you want to look a bit more. But to give you some context, so ETSI ZSM, it's an industry standardization group in ETSI. It stands for Zero Touch Network and Service Management. So you can see a bit the relationship with Anima. It was created roughly 2 years ago. It has been renewed for a second 2 years terms recently. So it will run again for 2 years. The main objectives: end-to-end automated network and service management architecture that has been already provided, to be supporting both, I will say, greenfield and brownfield environments. Doesn't need to reinvent everything, but to try to collaborate a lot with open source projects, especially, for instance, ONAP, which is the main counterpart of this ISG, and also other standardization bodies and fora, the IETF, 3GPP, GSMA, everything that is relevant for that. And so created foundation for diverse open source groups to produce interoperable solutions. The idea is really to have something workable. A few links if you want to have more documentation. So this may look a bit complex, but again, the idea is not to go into the ZSM architecture, but just to explain a few aspects of that. So the group has been developing a framework architecture. Some of the key elements, it's a service-based architecture. We are more used to see functional-based architecture. So there are some good advantages to that, and especially if we think about ASA as agents or services, we could see a good fit with some potential reuse of these ASAs in this architecture. So you have management services. This is the atomic entity providing a management service that is offered, a service-based approach. Then the management function is implementation that is providing the role to consume or produce a service. So this is quite also a software-oriented approach. Integration fabric is in fact a bus to connect all these services or the management functions together. And so to provide also some utility services to discover, to register, to connect. Different forms of communication patterns can also be provided by the integration fabric. So the idea is really to provide a lot of independence between the components and not to have each of the components to reinvent, to re-implement different communication interfaces or discovery interfaces, but to rely on the shared components. Cross-domain data services, this is to be able to collect data, of course. If you want to have automation and close the loops, you need to know what's happening. So to collect data from multiple sources, but also share those data between the different consumer of those data. This relates well to the work that Arthur was mentioning. And so this to make this available through this bus, PubSub typically, or whatever form you would like to support. Management domain, this is since ZSM aims to be applicable end-to-end. I mean, typically different network segments or administrative networks. So there is this notion of domain. This is where arbitrarily, whatever deployment, you will group your services and functions together. So if you say I have a mobile run type of domain, then it connects with the core domain and transport and etc. So, but each of the functions will be handled at the scale of a domain. And then you have this end-to-end service management domain, which is to provide the end-to-end service view, where you will point to the different domains in order to realize your service deployments and service management. This is just, I will not go through this. I have 3 slides highlighting a bit more the different components of the management domain, the end-to-end service management domain, some typical services that have been also specified in the architecture. So you can see for the different domains, data collection, analytics, intelligence, orchestration, control, integration fabric services also for registration, discovery, data services type of services, storage, persistent services. So this is typical type of services. One link I would like to make now, this can be partially seen as a component of ASAs. So we can also borrow from that if needed. Integration fabric details. So now a bit relationship to the ASA and closed loops aspects. So there have been also this notion when, if this is an automation framework, to rely not mandatorily, but at least to use a closed loop operation. We are not binding to any form of closed loop model. This is just to illustrate with a UDA type of loop. It will work with MapK, whatever number of steps you would like to implement in your closed loop, but it's just to show that there are essential steps you need to observe, you need to get information from the environment, from your managed entity, then to analyze this information, to end up with different types of insights, run some reasoning to derive decision plans, what to do with the current situation, and then to make an action selection decision of this on these plans to actuate on the resources or to reconfigure some different aspects. And you have in the middle a knowledge component that is used to be a repository of different knowledge that can be read or written from. So the architecture has been published in August this year. It's available publicly on this link. What more recently has happened also in June, the group has adopted 3 documents on closed loop automation. So one document is called enablers. This is typically what are the generic components that compose a closed loop and how these components needs to interact together in order to be very flexible and fulfill different types of deployment use cases. So this is where I see the most relationship with ASA in Anima. The second document on solution, this is to take the generic enablers on specific use cases and then to try to say, if I need to deploy a network slice, end-to-end lifecycle of network slice over different domains, what are the typical protocol that exist today to fulfill this use case, and to reuse the enabler specified and see if there are things existing in FujiPP, in Etsy, in IETF, in BBF to realize these solutions. If there are some gaps, this will be pointed out, could be developed in ZSM or could be sent back to the different SDOs to make the necessary changes. And the last document is, so the first 2 documents are specification, so equivalent of like standard track documents. The last one is informational, it's a report. It's more to study like next generation types of closed loops. So to open the door to more use of artificial intelligence and different levels of autonomy, but also everything that could not fit in the 2 other documents that will be a bit too immature will fit into these advanced topics. Current status of activity. So there are mainly two drivers in the design work. How to enable multi-vendor closed loop design. So you can translate that how to enable multi-vendor ASA design and specification. And closed loop spanning multiple domains. So this is typically if you have some processes, management processes, assurance loop or optimization loops that spans through different domains, operating domains or technology domains. And so the interactions among the domains to realize this closed loop operation. In ZSM1, we are targeting some, working on some requirements and also the design and modeling of the closed loops. What's important here, disaggregated view. I mean, that's usually we have also in Anima a view of ASA or closed loop being a kind of integrated component. What we are pushing in ZSM is also to say, now this needs to be a bit more disaggregated, deconstructed, so that you can have the different components and how to compose these components will be a key aspect of these enablers, enabling asynchronous operation between the components, and also enabling multiple input and outputs between the closed loop stages and functions. This is not a kind of single path in the closed loop. You can really see this service-based approach that if you have a data collection service that can be used by multiple analysis functions for multiple closed loops. So this is to address the key challenges of interoperability and composition of closed loop in a multi-vendor environment. ZSM2, so progressing on a list of scenarios, exchange between the closed loop stages for different use cases, provisioning of new resources, instantiation of backup resources, dynamic monitoring, etc. There are also 2 typical models that we try to use as for our thought process. So a kind of black box closed loop. This is typically what we see most of the time, and I will say currently in ASA is a bit seen like this. you interface with this closed loop through an agent process, but still you have to convey a certain type of semantics through these interfaces for governance information, how to set the goals, the operating condition, or the scope of this closed loop. Coordination between the closed loop needs also to go through this agent, and exchange of knowledge information. The output interface convey the other way governance information, such as exposure of capabilities, constraints, and requirements, different actions that were taken, or the status reports. Again, also providing the knowledge that has been discovered or produced and the actions. This closed loop manager or closed loop agent is a logical function responsible for managing the closed loop external interaction. So this is how to interface with something that is not the closed loop. But we have also, which is more the focus of the activity, this white box closed loop model. So this is still represented as a single component, but in fact, you can remove this square, this dotted square, to imagine that the different stages are really independent functions, and we need to connect them to compose them. So this is why we have, in that case, the same interfaces as the black box closed loop, but we want also to support way to compose the different stages, the steps of the closed loop, and also to have capability description and pairwise characteristic information between acquisition, analysis, decision, and implementation. Now making a bit the link between this work of closed loop in ZSM and Anima on the ASAs.
Can you come to an end?
That's the last slide. So roughly my understanding is that the closed loops that are being investigated in ZSM are equivalent of the autonomic service agents in Anima. ZSM will develop specification for closed loop automation, so how these different stages can interact using different forms of mechanism and what needs to be specified for that. So on the enablers, generic components of the closed loop, interaction patterns, and composition means. For the solutions, so applying on different use cases those enablers and reusing standard-based components or protocols. And for the advanced topic, this is more to investigate next-generation closed-loop design and operations and identify potential area for future standardization. So that's it.
Any questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Last speaker of the evening, please.
That's not the right slide.
No, not yet.
Right. This will be very quick. So I think we talked about this at the last meeting briefly. We'll skip the topics list anyway. Can you line it up?
Yep.
So just a reminder that the scenarios we're talking about are ones not direct competition with the traditional ACP. The theory is that a simpler layer 2 solution to the ACP could be used on a very small enterprise or in a large enterprise that actually wants to chop its network up anyway, and then therefore would be willing to use a layer 2 ACP in each segment of the network. The other thing which is different from the real ACP is that, at least for a small network, some degree of pre-configuration of the ACP nodes would be acceptable, because that's something that doesn't scale to a large network but would be okay in a smaller network. So we have a list of requirements for the layer 2 technology in the draft. Must support v6, must support layer 2 multicast, MTU size. It must be able to isolate a set of nodes, in other words, an ACP VLAN in practice. And there must be some secure authorization mechanism for access to that VLAN, which most VLANs will provide one way or another, and a few other requirements. All of this was in the document before. I just wanted to mention the updates since last time. We added a discussion of MACsec, which has got an IEEE magic number. The good news is that it supports multicast, including group authentication. The point about group authentication is it's trust one, trust all, so there is no there's a single trust model that covers all the multicasting nodes. It applies across all VLANs, but the ACP VLAN can, of course, be isolated from the data plane VLAN independently of MACsec. So although they're both protected by MACsec, they're also separate VLANs, so they remain separate. We noted in the draft that you could actually use security on the Wi-Fi segment as well by using a dedicated BSS for the Layer 2 ACP. That wouldn't be very elegant, and it provides an interesting problem of how you would do bridging between the wired and wireless networks. So basically, that's all I have to say. I'm not asking for working group adoption at this time. I'd just like to know if people are interested or if we should simply let this document expire.
Personally, I'm quite interested in this work, but as working group chair, I'm not sure that's because that layer 2 is not typically IETF scope. So we would like to get advice from our AD. Also, I'm worried a little bit whether we have enough expertise in our working group to handle such work.
I'm pretty sure we don't, and we'll have to go outside for the expertise.
Yes.
Mark Smith for the Internet Society for this IETF. I work in the V6 ops and the 6-man groups, and one of the thoughts I've had about IPv6 is, in addition to solving lots of addresses problems, potentially in the future people will actually build much bigger VLANs, because there's it's been traditional to do /24s, which implies a limit of 255 nodes. Obviously V6 with /64s can support much bigger than that. So I think the constraint on size of VLANs will really just be multicast traffic. So potentially, you know, subnets with 5,000 nodes on them won't be that unusual in the future. I've in the past seen VLANs with 4,000 IPv4 hosts on them. So maybe this sort of fits in with that, deploying 400 switches, that sort of solution.
Remedial from Huawei. I think the usage scenario is quite interesting. So in your mind, how big campus is defined as big?
Well, I'm no expert in this at all, but I do notice that one answer to your question is the network in the Swiss hotel is too big.
Too many?
Right? The network in the Swiss hotel is too big, right? Which is why they've had to switch off IPv6. So I think the limit might be much lower than you might want.
Okay. Could you go back to like slide 3, I think?
No. This one?
This one, yes.
Yeah.
So here you have said that it should support IPv6 packets.
Yeah.
And this packet should be like, I don't know, from the L2 perspective, it is just one hop for every IPv6 packet. So for IPv6, it is just a link local?
Well, it could work with link local, actually, yeah. I mean, the grasp is designed to work with link local if it has to.
And IPv6 is a mandatory option or not?
That was sort of a starting point for Anima. There's probably no reason you couldn't distort this and make it work over V4, but it's never been, a design point for us.
I mean, pure L2 signaling without IP.
Yeah, I don't know any real reason why it couldn't be remapped to IPv4, but it's it's not written that way in any of the specs. So yeah.
I mean, I does not mean I don't mean to IPv4. I mean only layer 2 messages. I don't know. So here I'm asking that if IP is it is optional or it is mandatory.
I don't quite see any benefit in running directly over layer 2 packets, but I mean, I suppose it could be done.
Okay.
All you have to do is give me the API.
So here, okay, yeah, TCP is a good reason for that. Yeah. And so here, you mean that we should have, for example, the the L2 header, and then we have the IPv6 header, and then
Sure.
you can like transport some grasp signaling.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. I got it.
Okay, so we are already 5 minutes over time.
It's
so
time for the
be quick.
social.
Yeah.
So just a quick comment to repeat, especially in the context of what you were saying. The one thing I'd like to make sure if we continue this work is to, make sure that readers understand that the ACP today already supports managing a layer 2 network in terms of if the service you want to bring is not a routed network, but a metropolitan where access network, for example, where all the devices are meant to do layer 2 switching, you can run the ACP and only the ACP will be hop by hop routed. And I think that's a very good starting point to support, let's say IEEE technologies.
Yeah.
Right. So I think I would want to make it clear that just because you want to support networks where the services are, let's say, IEEE technologies, large switch networks, we don't need to change something.
Yeah, absolutely.
And these things that you're doing here basically need to be viewed, I think, and discussed more in that context in terms of what are we gaining if the ACP itself isn't layer 3, but also layer 2. And I think that goes into the depth of different type of product limitations. And we understand that, but I think that it is a lot more explanation required.
Yeah. Okay. If that's in the minutes, it'll go into the next version.
So quick information update. There is a LSVR working group, link state vector routing. They are working on what is called layer 3 discovery and liveness. And that is a mechanism for bootstrapping large fabric-based topologies. I would recommend to take a look into that. You might find a lot of good ideas there.
Thank you.
LSVR, link state vector routing.
Okay, if that's in the minutes, I will do so.
Okay. Yeah, that's finish our session today. 7 minutes over time. I'm sincerely sorry for that. So enjoying your social events tonight. Hopefully see you tomorrow. Also afternoon session, brisk session. Okay, thank you. Thank you, guys.